There are millions of podcasts being done all over the world that take on the personalities of their creator. Some bring in thousands of listeners each week. Some bring in large amounts of revenue, while others entertain millions and help sell products. If you're like many podcasters, you want to reach your maximum potential. But how? How do you make your podcast stand out from all the rest? Join Dr. Barrett Matthews as he talks to experts who are doing it on The Productive Podcaster. All right, everybody, welcome to another episode of The Productive Podcaster. My name is Dr. Barrett Matthews, and I want to welcome you to the podcast. Now, first of all, I want to tell you, for those of you who are listening for the first time, that this podcast is for those of you who may be looking to start a podcast, or some who may have started, but you're looking for a new and innovative way, and you want to know that there's no cookie cutter way to do it. A lot of people are apprehensive about starting a podcast because they don't think they can be productive if they're not doing what everyone else is doing. And you don't have to. You can do it any way you want. And that's what we're here to show you on The Productive Podcaster. Now, I want to have everybody out there, make sure you share this right now. Make sure you let everyone know that you're listening to The Productive Podcaster. And I want you to go ahead and subscribe and go to our Patreon page when you get a chance, and go ahead and check us out, The Productive Podcaster. We'd love to have your support. We have some fantastic perks out there for you if you take a chance and go look at it on Patreon. Now, what I like to start off every show with is a segment I like to call Pros and Cons.
Pros and Cons.
Now, what is pros and cons? Pros and cons is a segment where I like to give you a pro tip to help you to become a productive podcaster. And today we want to talk about scripting your show, scripting your podcast. I'm not a big advocate of scripting from top to bottom your show. I think that you should actually have segments that you do write down and know what you're going to talk about. But I'm not a fan of scripting it because it sounds like you're reading a script a lot of times. And it doesn't sound natural. A podcast should sound natural. After all, it's your show. You should be able to talk about certain things and feel free when you do it. But I do believe you should have everything segmented out to where you know how your podcast is going to go, so you're not running by the thread of your pants or whatever, so that you're like, oh God, what am I doing? What am I doing next? So you should know what you're doing in your podcast, but it doesn't have to be so regimented. So that is pros and cons for today. So right now, I'm going to take a quick break, and we're going to be back with a very good guest. I know I can't help it. I got all good guests. I can't help it. So you guys stay tuned. We'll be right back with more of The Productive Podcaster. Why should you contact Media Boss Club right now? Well, because you can get a podcast done for you. You can learn all the aspects that go into putting together a great podcast and have someone else do it for you. That's right. We will build your podcast around your content and make it so you can concentrate on the money-making activities of your business. Contact MediaBossClub.com. That's MediaBossClub.com today, and let us get your podcast started right now. How are you going to learn everything you need to know about starting a podcast? Well, at the Create Your Podcast Weekend, we put it all in 2 days and help you get your podcast going by next week. That's right, by next week. All you have to do is come to the Create Your Podcast Weekend and let us show you how to get your podcast up and running. We will show you how to attract listeners. We will show you how to get people to pay you for your products and services. What products and services? The products and services we show you how to create, all at the Create Your Podcast Weekend. All you have to do is go to createyourpodcastweekend.com and get registered today. And we have special bonuses. Some of you will even get us to give you the equipment to start your podcast. That's right. We're going to give some of you the podcasting equipment to get started. Go to createyourpodcastweekend.com. That's createyourpodcastweekend.com and get started on your podcast by next week. All right, everybody, welcome back to the Productive Podcast. And like I said, I have a really good guest, a really special guest. Look, let me tell you something. The man has overcome a lot. He's battled addictions. He's battled a broken home, but he is back up on his feet. And not only is he up on his feet, he is running not one, but two podcasts. He is running the top-rated MMA podcast and the Erik Allen Show, which has done 300 episodes. So who am I talking about? Well, yeah, I said the host of the Erik Allen Show, so none other but the one and only Mr. Erik Allen. Erik, welcome to the Productive Podcast, everybody.
Man, thank you so much for having me on, dude. Such an honor, man. This is awesome.
Man, I'm glad to have you here. I got to find out. First of all, let's talk about the top-rated MMA podcast. That one, sure. I got to talk about that one. So let's get it. How did you even start that podcast?
Well, it started out as an apparel company in 2012. Top Rated MMA. My wife and I sitting around, I was like, hey, I want to start a t-shirt company. And so she came up with the name Top Rated MMA, and she said, well, how do you make it different? Because this was like during the tap out era. And so she said, hey, let's do 100% American-made MMA apparel. And we were probably one of two companies in the entire United States that did that at that time.
Really?
And yeah. And so that's what we did. And we launched as that. It took off way faster than I was prepared. And we started getting calls from like the UFC, like management team saying, hey, will you sponsor this fighter? And they wanted like $10,000. I'm like, dude, I started this company with $5, and, so just like, the opportunity wasn't there, but I kept going. And then in 2015, I got bored with it. I wasn't making any money. I was like, I'm going to put this up. I literally put an ad in Craigslist and said, who wants to buy this company, this brand name, the followers, everything? Some guy called me on it. It was going to pay me like $3,000 for the name. And in that call, I said, no, I'm going to refresh. I'm going to restart and do a whole new thing. And so in 2017, I launched the Top Rated MMA podcast. Right. And I just wanted to understand the fighters. Like, why do you want to get into a cage and get punched in the face? And, I'm a huge fan. I've never been in the cage. I've never fought except for one time with my mom's boyfriend when I was 13. But I wanted to understand their mindset. Like, why do they want to get in the cage? And so I started it in a walk-in closet, did almost 100 episodes in a walk-in closet, not knowing what I was doing, barely looked at the camera, horrible lighting, horrible microphone. Right. And now, episode 221 drops this weekend for me.
That's amazing. And what's cool, that's a fantastic story, first of all. This started from an apparel company, the idea of you and your wife, and now look at it. And I was wondering, I'm glad you said that, because I was wondering, I wonder if he fought. And so
I like being on this side of the cage.
Yeah, right. Yeah. And I wanted the same thing. I'm like, why would you let someone do that to you?
Yeah.
I'm like, I have no interest in getting punched in the face.
It's, I wanted to understand why, right? And so I asked fighters this, and a lot of them say, hey, I grew up doing karate, or I grew up doing wrestling and transitioned to that. But then I've got some of the fighters who are like, I have felony charges and I can't get a real job, but I can get paid to go get in a fight and I can put food on my table. So that's why I do that.
And it's funny you said that, because I remember hearing these stories a long time ago about boxers, especially like ones in Philadelphia and stuff. They said that was all they could do. Yeah. That was all they knew how to do, was just to go and fight. And some of them, they had brain damage from it, but it was just that was all they could do. So yeah, I get it. So you get all those types of stories on your podcast.
Yes. Yeah. And so I like to call it, real stories, real fighters. Because one question that I ask right off the bat for all my guests is, where did you grow up and what was childhood like? And a lot of them will deep dive into like, man, my childhood was brutal. I had this abusive home and things like that. And some of them were good, right? But I like to open that up with that question, because I want my listeners to understand that these are just real people too.
Yeah.
No matter how successful they are or how big they are, like they had a childhood that could have been worse than the listeners,
Yeah. Yeah. And that's a good point, because you got to humanize it.
Yep.
You got to humanize it. I like that. So I got to ask, so what are some of the big names you've had?
I've had Ken Shamrock on my show twice.
Okay.
And that guy is amazing. Chris Lieberman. Wow. I've had Jose Shorty Torres on my show, Julian Erosa, Miranda Granger, Sabina Mazo. We continue to get these big names, and really I focus on these up and coming amateur fighters from around the world, and these up and coming like pro fighters. And I do that for a couple reasons. One, it helps get their name out there. My whole goal is to help fighters get known and noticed online. And so if I can help these up and coming guys get on my show and get their name out there, that makes me feel good, right? And I think a lot of MMA podcasts out there, they go for those bigger names and they try to get these big names out there. And I think that's great. but I think the underdogs are the guys who really want to get their names out there. So that's what I really focus on. Occasionally I'll have the big names on there too.
So first of all, how do you book them? How do you get them booked?
Yeah. So I do 99% of my guests are booked through Instagram Messenger.
Whoa.
And that's for both of my shows.
Well, there you go. And I'm glad you said that, Erik, because a lot of people think that it has to be some big agency or something. And I love I love that.
Yeah. And you have to be very specific with it. Mm-hmm. I think when I first started out and I started reaching out, I would do this like templated message, right? Like, here's where I am and here's who my text is, or, my show is and things like that. And over time, I evolved that. And so I actually no longer send a text message like to that person. Mm-hmm. For the fighters, I do occasionally, but I usually will personalize it. But anytime I'm picking out like somebody that I really want on my show, I'm actually pulling out my phone and I'm doing a 30-second video. Hey, Ed Milet, what's going on? It's Erik Allen. I'm out here in Coeur d'Alene. I saw that you did this and that. Man, I would love to help you push that book out. I think you'd be great for my show. Let's connect. 30 seconds max. And I send that to him via Instagram. And that's how I've been able to book the big names from Bedros Keuilian to Brad Lee.
Amazing. Man, I hope you guys are taking notes because I sure am. That is cool. So how has having the podcast take off like this, has it helped the apparel business?
Yeah, I still do custom prints. When I first started it, we spent way too much money on apparel that we didn't sell. We ended up donating a bunch to Hurricane Katrina and just like saying, hey, these guys need some clothes. I'm not selling it. Let's just go down there and give it to those folks, right? So over the years, I've bought my own heat press. So I have my own heat press now at the house, and I have a hat press. So I do all the apparel just on demand. So I don't keep a lot of inventory in stock, but it does help. And so when I go to local MMA events where I'm out here in Idaho, I'll typically bring a box full of shirts and hats and stuff like that and sell them through that. I don't really focus on selling that through my website, more so just really in-person events now.
Gotcha. So now let's talk about the Erik Allen Show.
Yeah.
I like that you have two of them. So tell me about that one.
Yeah, it started out
checking on myself. So yeah, go on.
No, that's yeah, it definitely keeps me busy. It started out as the Bearded Biz Show, and it started as more of a joke, like, hey, now that I have this podcast called The Bearded Biz, I never have to shave my beard. And my wife, being the smart one, she's like, yeah, but you're kind of niching yourself down too far. And so then we changed the name. Just in the last couple of months, we changed it. So yeah, I started that because in 2018, I came across a guy named Ed Milet online. And I was hooked from the first time that I heard him. I started downloading all of his stuff from YouTube, and I was binge watching all of his stuff on YouTube. And then, so I got this idea because I've always been entrepreneurial. I've always loved entrepreneurs. And in the same sense of fighters, I want to know why they get punched in the face, but entrepreneurs, same thing. I want to know why they get punched in the face, but hopefully not physically, right? We get all the rejections in the nose and things like that, right? Why do we want to continue to do that? And so when I came across Ed, I got this idea to start this new show, the Bearded Biz Show. And in 2018, he issued the Max Out Challenge on Instagram, where he said, you have to submit a 1-minute story to me of what you're passionate about, what drives you, what's your business, why do you want to be successful? And I submitted that story to him. And then about 2 months later, he announced me as Ed Milet's Max Out Challenge winner. And I got to win a phone call with him. And that was episode 12 of my show. And that has been really the foundation of my podcast over the last year.
So how's that affected? Have you gotten listeners from that?
Yeah, for sure. So prior to Ed, I actually had Sean Whalen on my show. I had Vincent Rocco, that's an actor on my show. And the first guest was a buddy of mine that has climbed all 7, biggest mountains in the world, things like that. But having Sean on the call, that guy was amazing. And then to get Ed, and it was like, whoa, now I got Ed on the show. And I the call that I had with him, I asked his team, can I record this? And so I just took highlights of that and released that as episode 12 of my episode. But then when I was reaching out to other people like, hey, I've had Ed Milet and Sean Whalen on my show. I'd love to have you on my show as well. That kind of, I think, helped. And so that's how I was able to get Tim Story, who was also on Ed's show. Bedros Keuilian was on Ed's show. Brad Lee, they've been on each other's show. And so that just opened up the door for more and more guests.
You are rolling, man.
Yeah, trying. Absolutely.
You are rolling, and you get to keep your beard. So that's
yes, and I get to keep the beard. Yes. What happened was I used to grow the beard out just once a year. I'd grow it for 30 days, just sometime random during the year. And my 3-year-old daughter, when she was 3, I shaved it off, and she was like, "What?" She didn't want me to shave the beard, so she was really sad. So I said, "All right, I'm never shaving the beard again." So now I have the beard.
Wow, cool.
Yeah.
Amazing effect that daughters have on fathers.
Totally.
Now, it's funny because like you have your show and you're doing 2 podcasts. What challenges do you run into in doing 2 podcasts?
Man, time is always crunch for me because I still work a full-time job.
Okay.
So I work from 8 to 5 for a full-time job, but I've been working remote since 2015. So when the whole COVID, everybody went home, it wasn't a big change for me.
Same here.
But I wake up at 4 a.m. 6 days a week. And I wake up at 4 a.m. and I get in the shower and I come upstairs and I spend time in prayer and listen to worship and get my mindset ready for the day. And then I start editing shows and reaching out to guests. And at 6:30, I go down and make my kids lunch and breakfast. And at 8 o'clock, I start my regular job. And then at 5 o'clock at the end of the day, it's family time. So I shut everything down. But I had to figure out my time management very easy because I've got about only an hour and a half each morning to really focus on my show and learning and growing personally and spiritually and in my business and things like that, and edit 2 shows a week. So yeah, time management was the hardest thing for me to get used to.
Well, you basically you put that, and I hope everybody's paying attention to this. He took his podcast seriously enough to where he had to make sure he scheduled everything, including the podcast, in his day. So it's not something you do willy-nilly. You actually are serious about it, and you put it to work for you. I love that. So as far as doing the podcast, other than the time, of course, what kind of other benefits have you had from the show?
I love the connections with people. I mean, I selfishly, I'm so fascinated with people's stories, and I selfishly just wanted to talk to people just one-on-one so I could hear their story. But then I was like, man, I'm really being selfish if I don't share this, right? I got to share this knowledge out with people. And so that's why I kind of really started to share the stories, because I think people's stories are so good, whether they're multimillionaires or billionaires, or they're just guys out there that are literally changing the world with some invention or their story. I love it all. I mean, I've talked with everybody from a 14-year-old kid that was in England making 30 grand a year. He lived on a farm, had no technology, and he's making massive money on eBay by flipping toys, to Ed Milet, of course, right? So I love that distance between the people that I've had on my show. And I just love to hear stories. And like I said, it doesn't matter to me, but if they're out there changing the world or they're successful minded, those are the people that I want to talk to. And
you never know where they're going to come from. And like you said, somebody from in England, I mean, I interviewed someone from the Netherlands recently. I interviewed someone from Germany. You never know where the people are going to come from. And it's a cool thing, because the thing is, let's take MMA, for instance. Yeah. We got MMA going here, but people are into MMA all over the world.
Yep.
You don't know who's going to be listening to your show. That's why I tell people when I talk to them about podcasting is that your message isn't for you. Your message is for people who you may never meet, but it's for those people, and that's the great thing. I mean, I know, like you said, you shut it down and to have family time, but I gotta ask, how is your daughter into your podcast?
They love the podcast. My kids don't come on the show or anything like that, but they're always asking Dad, who did you interview this week? Or who did you talk to this week? I want to hear their stories. That's cool. And so they're very involved on the back end of it. Right. And so, people are like, why do you wake up at 4 a.m.? Well, here's my thing is I wake up at 4 a.m. because my desire to be successful is bigger than my desire to sleep.
Gotcha.
And so that's why I focus on getting up early. That's my time that I can be on my own, kind of that magic hour where I don't have to, bug my kids. I don't have to wake them up, but I don't have to worry about, doing that. But that hour and a half of each day is really where I can nail down and focus on growing my business.
So I got to ask, have they asked you to come and do a remote podcast at an MMA event?
So I do cover the live events out here.
Oh, you do?
Yeah. So I work with a company called Proving Grounds, and they do an event out here. It's an all amateur event. They typically do 15 fights on the night. And for the last 3 years, I'm typically at every event sitting cage side, which is great. I love that. And I do live results. So I will cover a lot of the, while the fights are going on, this guy won via round 1 or things like that. Yeah. And then I also interview a lot of the fighters that are on that card. So I'm going to be interviewing a fighter tomorrow that works out of that gym. He trains out of that gym with those guys. So yeah, I love being involved in that. I've been covering fights for about 3 or 4 years now.
It sounds like some of these fighters could end up being on your other podcast. You could have them come on one podcast to another.
Totally. Yep. Absolutely.
That is so cool. So Erik, man, I want to thank you so much for being here today with me. I enjoyed it so much. I could talk to you for a long time. I want to ask you before I let you go, please tell everyone the names of both your podcasts and where they can listen to them.
Yeah, thank you so much. Again, such an honor to be here. But Top Rated MMA is my MMA show. It's where I highlight up and coming MMA fighters that are amateur and pro from around the world. I have a personal goal to invite or to speak to a male and female fighter from every state and every country. And we're almost there. We're going for that right now. And then the other show is the Erik Allen Show. It's where I talk with entrepreneurs, world changers, and success-minded people. And the best place to reach me is erikallenmedia.com. And I'm really active on Instagram. It's just Erik G. Allen. I respond to all DMs and comments and things like that. I love networking, connect with new people.
Okay, I'm looking forward to listening to both of them. This is going to be fun. So guys, guess what? Erik's not going anywhere, but we're going to take a quick break. But while we take this break, it's a good time for you to go ahead and subscribe to his podcast as well. We're going to be back. He's going to be back with more of the Productive Podcast, because we're going to go into PodQuest. We're going to answer a question. So stay right there. We'll be right back with more of Erik Allen and me on the Productive Podcaster. Let's face it, you've been talking about starting a podcast for quite some time, but you haven't started yet. Why is that? Could it be that you just don't have the time because your day-to-day keeps you so busy? Or could it be that you don't want to learn all the technical aspects that go into putting together a quality podcast? Well, at Media Boss Club, we take care of that for you. How would you like to have a done-for-you experience? That's right. At Media Boss Club, we build your podcast for you. We will edit your podcast. We will put in the music for you. We even put in commercial breaks that you can put your advertisers in. We will take care of all of the uploading to the great podcast platforms that are out there. That's right, we do everything. All you have to do is just right now go to MediaBossClub.com. That's MediaBossClub.com, and let us handle the heavy lifting for you. Starting a podcast can be a daunting task. There's a lot that goes into it, and you're probably wondering if you're able to handle it. Well, why don't you just take 2 days and let us teach you how to do it at the Create Your Podcast Weekend. That's right. We're going to show you all the aspects of how to start your podcast, how to keep your podcast going, how to attract listeners, and how to make money with your podcast. CreateYourPodcastWeekend.com. Get registered right now. All right, guys, welcome back to the Productive Podcaster with Erik Cool or What. I love it. The fact that the man is killing 2 shows, two podcasts. So those of you who are wondering if you can do one, yeah, you can do one. He's doing 2. So make sure you guys pay attention to that and subscribe to his show. But he is still here because we are here to do PodQuest.
PodQuest.
Now, PodQuest is where we take a question from an audience member that they sent in. Now, for those of you who are wondering how you can get your question answered, relax. All you have to do is join our Facebook group, which is the Productive Podcaster, and make sure that you get there and you engage. Now, when I say engage, this is not for you to promote your podcast. You will be deleted. So this is for you to engage, meaning ask questions, answer questions, give some tips, help one another. That's what we're there for. When you start promoting, you're out. We're not there for that. But the question that is asked today is, who should I get to host my podcast? So, Erik, I'll let you answer it first.
Yeah. So for me, I've always done everything on a very low budget. And when I first started, like I said, I had no idea what I was doing. And Anchor had just launched. So I actually host on Anchor. And I know a lot of people either hate that app or they love it. Ooh. And for me, I've never had any issues. The customer service has been great. If I have a question with support, they're always quickly to get back to me. The one thing I would say is if you do go with Anchor, it's free. but I would set up the personal relationships with the other, like Apple, Spotify, Amazon, iHeartRadio, all of that yourself. You do have the option to allow Anchor to set up those connections for you. But I think personally, I would prefer to do that myself. That way, if I decided to change the host, I still have a connection or relationship with that, Apple and Spotify and all that stuff. So I use Anchor. I love it. You can also earn a little bit of money by, promoting Anchor in your podcast at some point. And I think I've generated over $100 just from, plugging those guys on my podcast. Right. So I would recommend Anchor. I personally like it. That's who I go through.
Okay. And my answer to that is this. It depends on what you want. Yeah. I remember I went to a podcasting conference about a year or so ago, and all of these people were there. Anchor, you had Podbean, you had all of them, Libsyn, all of them were there. And I noticed they all had different things that they offered. Little slight, some of them did the same thing, but there's the one difference. But depending on if that difference is meaningful to you or not. Right. And so it's really, in my opinion, is what you want out of that host. And like Erik said, it depends on if you want to pay for it and how much you're willing to pay for it and so forth as well, because it's really going to come down to what you need out of that podcast. And since neither one of them are paying me enough to mention them on here, I'm not going to promote one specifically to you. But so it depends on really what you want out of it. Because God knows I vacillated back and forth. I want to go with this one. Do I want to go with this one? Before I actually made a decision. So and that can be the same for you as well. Or you can do like Erik did. Hey, I'm going free. I'm going to go to Anchor. So I know a lot of people that do that.
It's tough if you have two podcasts to look at like Libsyn and all these guys who pay, you have to pay for so much for, the amount of time and things like that. It's so true. For me to do that, I would have to generate a ton of money through my website. And even Anchor, right? They don't have a team function or a multi-podcast function. So I actually have to use two different emails to log in, one for one show and one for the other one. And so that's the biggest, I would say, pain in the butt. Yeah. But free, and I'm like, I can still earn a little bit of money if I go through Anchor. So that's how I'm doing it.
I like it. So Erik, once again, I want to thank you for joining me here on the Productive Podcast. And once again, tell them the names of your podcast and where they can listen to you, please.
Top Rated MMA and the Erik Allen Show. We're on all audio formats, all video formats from IGTV, YouTube, Facebook, all that. You can connect with me on erikallenmedia.com. It's ERIK, or Erik G. Allen on Instagram. Love networking and connecting with people on there.
Fantastic. Guys, I want you guys to go right now. Top MMA and Erik Allen Show. Make sure you guys subscribe. Make sure you download some episodes. Listen to him. Support the brother. And make sure that you are following him when you see him at some MMA fights. He's going to be there. So he's not going to be fighting. So just make sure that you go say hello to him if you see him there. All right. So Erik, thank you so much. Hey, guys, it's time for our next segment of the show, which is my podcast profile. This is where I listen to a podcast and I tell you about it, and maybe you guys may want to listen to it as well. The one I listened to this week is called the Paranormal Podcast. If you like listening to some of the sci-fi stuff, maybe, or some of the X-Files, so to speak, listen to the Paranormal Podcast. It's hosted by a guy named Jim Harrell, and it's quite interesting. You might like it yourself. Now it's also time for my podcast giveaway. The podcast giveaway. This goes to someone who's been listening to the show, who's been engaging in, that's right, the Facebook group for the Productive Podcaster. This one goes to Jason Shorter. Jason Shorter, you're going to get this sign to put on your door when you're doing your podcast and tell people, leave me alone. No, this is not paper. So it's sturdy. It'll hang on his door. Tell people, leave me alone. I'm doing my podcast right now. So way to go, Jason Shorter. We want to make sure that you enjoy that. We'll get that to you ASAP. Now, it's time to end the show on what I love to do, my podcast productivity quote. As you all know, I've been doing a lot of quotes by Sunday Adelaja. Sunday Adelaja gives some great quotes. This one says, your daily product determines how far you go. Your daily product determines how far you go. So what are you putting out each day, guys? What are you putting out each day? Because whatever it is, that's going to determine how far you go, what you're going to do with your life. So understand, if you're not putting anything out, well, you have no one else to blame for that. So make sure you guys are putting some daily product out that's going to keep you moving in a forward direction. So as we sign off, I want to thank my guest, Erik Allen, for joining me today. And I want to thank you guys for listening. And I want you to make sure you subscribe to his show, but also subscribe to the Productive Podcaster and make sure you share it with everyone. And go to Patreon, guys. Check us out on Patreon, the Productive Podcaster. We got some great, cool perks for you guys just for supporting the show. You go right there today, and I'm sure we're going to get looked out for the right way. So before we sign off, I always say the same thing. You all know it. Don't just settle for being awesome. Set your goal to all them all. And take action, everybody. We'll see you next time on the Productive Podcast. Thank you for joining us on the Productive Podcaster. Be sure to join us next time for another great show. We welcome your engagement, so make sure you participate by joining the Productive Podcaster Facebook group and chime in. Also, share the Productive Podcaster with some of your friends right now. If you have a podcast and you're looking for guests, or if you would like to be a guest on a podcast, join our podcast exchange at www.podcastworlddirectory.com. We'll see you next time.